This video is brought to you by MoviePalette.com. Hey everyone, do you have a favorite movie that you would love to hang on your wall but you can't think of what scene or what poster to get? Well, now you can get the entire movie on one high quality canvas. With MoviePalette.com, you can get every scene from your favorite movie, or more specifically, the dominant color of every scene from your favorite movie in chronological order on a great high quality canvas. It also comes with a silver engraving of the title down at the bottom. It has rubber stoppers on the back to keep it from bouncing. And they have a huge catalog of what to choose from. Whether you're a horror fan, or a fan of sci-fi, Marvel, Japanese anime, Disney animation, drama, or Oscar classics, there's a movie palette for you. And right now, MoviePalette.com is having a sale for 50% off for their Halloween sale. But if you go right now, and if you enter room 15, you'll get 15% off of the movie palette of your choice. That's ROOM15 for 15% off of your movie palette. Again, this is a great value for a great piece of home decor that looks great for any film and for any film buff and anywhere in your home. You will definitely like this product. Mine is of The Shining, and I could not be happier with it. So definitely go to MoviePalette.com and enter ROOM15 for 15% off of your palette. Hey horror fans, welcome back to Room237, back with another review. And as I continue my month of October run through of Stephen King films, I come to this one, which is not one that I own, but it's one of actually several that are exclusive to Netflix, which I've already reviewed. Gerald's Game. I do need to do Mr. Harrigan's Phone that just dropped this past week. And there's a couple other ones that I have not seen. I believe In the Tall Grass is a Stephen King story. But then there's this one, which I remember when this came out in 2017. And for some reason, I did not watch it then. I didn't even really know what it was about up until just now when I first watched it. And it's the 2017 film 1922. Kind of pause and sound like I'm all over the place. I apologize for that. But it's based on his 2010 short story of the same name. And even though I knew this kind of dealt with, a guy kills his wife and then kind of goes insane, that was really all I really knew about it before watching it. But having finished watching it, it made me think if Pet Sematary is kind of like Stephen King's version of the classic story, The Monkey's Paw, which is one of my favorite stories of all time, this really feels like Stephen King's version of my favorite short story of all time, The Telltale Heart by Edgar Allan Poe. I love that short story. I love stories like this, where it does deal with a murder and just all the sort of this character just going through, I guess you could call it a decay, but through guilt. Like, his guilt just keeps piling on top of him, and with different ways, until eventually the whole reason why he committed this act was really all for nothing anyway. Now, it's also like Telltale Heart because it is presented to us in this sort of first-person confessional. In the movie, that's depicted as, we pick up in 1930, the guy's writing out his confession, and we see it through flashback. I actually have not read the short story yet, but from what I've heard, it's very faithful. The book, the movie's left more ambiguous, whereas the book is a bit more direct, especially towards the ending. I will say I like how this movie ends with its sort of ambiguous nature, even though it heavily implies what's going to happen. But I do want to say this is up there with Gerald's Game for being a very satisfying movie, especially for well, I should say especially for Netflix, because Netflix actually does have a lot of good stuff on it. But it's very well shot, very very well made and directed. Its lead performance really helps sell it, and I actually did not know that this starred Thomas Jane. I didn't recognize him in any of the trailers I saw, but I believe this is his third Stephen King film. There was Dreamcatcher and The Mist. I would have to say this is his best performance out of those three at least. And I would have to say this is my favorite of those three films. Mainly because I just really like this kind of story more. And I like how all these supernatural elements could just be sort of. I didn't really take any of the supernatural elements as literal. I took them as either one, interpretations for us, but sort of how guilt is manifesting itself to Thomas Jane. So I like how the supernatural stuff is sort of used as like a, a metaphor or a visual representation rather than just being a sort of out of nowhere supernatural element. But it was written and directed by Zach Hilditch, and he did a great job. This is a very sleek looking movie. It's very atmospheric. It relies more on just the dreary, just somber tone rather than these lurid scares. And it is a rather bleak watch. I mean, considering the reasons this guy is doing this and then just where he ends up by the end of the film, it is pretty depressing. Even though this isn't a guy we should be rooting for, just the sort of the way the downfall is depicted, you kind of can't help but feel sorry for him. Let's see, Thomas Jane, Neil McDonough, and Molly Parker. But it also stars uh, Dylan Schmidt, Caitlin Bernard, Brian Darcy, and Bob Fraser. It it got some pretty good reviews. Has a 91 on Rotten Tomatoes, and most people are really saying that Thomas Jane is the takeaway. I I agree to that to an extent. I do think the atmosphere and the direction is very strong, but Thomas Jane's performance really does sell it as well. And this is more of just a personal thing, but I've always had a thing for when actors try to do accents, especially New England and Southern accents. No matter how good the movie is, no matter how good the performance is, just when an actor is trying to do an accent, for some reason, I find it grating at first. I do get used to it. A prime example would be like Robert De Niro with Cape Fear. Um, and this sounds more like a stereotypical Southern accent rather than it does a specific region of any kind, even though it takes place in Nebraska. And he does do it well. But one thing that I did pick up on was, Thomas Jane's a little bit older now. He's playing a farmer, so he's like really tan, and he's kind of doing this thing with his mouth, like he's doing a lot of. And I couldn't help but notice in some scenes he looks like he's turning into like a buff Jim Varney. He kind of looked like Ernest in a lot of these scenes, which I thought was kind of humorous. But yeah, Thomas Jane is definitely a takeaway. And just the whole nature of the film, this Telltale Heart, you know, kill. What Telltale Heart was not a murder for monetary gain. That was more for prejudice. But murder for monetary gain, how smart this guy is at just creating this elaborate story and being able to stick to it, and then just everything that follows. Um, I found it very captivating. Now, some people might not like it because of the pacing. It is rather slow. It's pretty. The first half is pretty fast paced, but then once the guilt really starts to set in, and especially around winter time, because about the halfway point it turns over to winter, and that's when the movie really slows down. But that's when the guilt really starts to take over, and we really just watch the downfall of this character. I still found it captivating. I still found it very interesting. The direction can be very hypnotic at times. Also, the uh, uh, darkly ominous score was pretty hypnotic at times. Which the cinematography is done by Ben Richardson, and the music by Mike Patton. And released to Netflix October 20th of 2017. And yeah, it sits at 101 minutes. Maybe it could have been trimmed a little bit, but ultimately, I do think the slow pace and just kind of how long it is really does kind of help capture how lonely this guy is, and just all this time he has for the guilt to set in, and how he has to live with himself. I did get was wondering at some points, because when we're in 1930 and he's in this hotel, he's got like a beard. He seems to be wearing nicer clothes. It's a nice room. I was thinking, is this going to be like the ending to There Will Be Blood? Just kind of a guy that came from nothing, but now he has a lot, but now he has a confession. It doesn't go that way at all, but so yeah, he's we see older Thomas Jane goes to this hotel. He starts writing down his confession, which again makes him an unreliable narrator. Does that mean everything we see that happens, or is it just how he recollects or interprets? And again, all the supernatural stuff I don't think is meant to be taken literally. Even though one of the biggest symbols of the film is rats, I'm noticing that in a few King films, rats play a major role in a few of them. It's not that I don't think the rats exist, it's that I think the rats represent something different, or they mean something different to Thomas Jane. Which Jane plays the character, was it Wilfred James or Wilf? He lives out in the middle of nowhere on this farmhouse that his family's had for generations. His whole philosophy is that all you need in life is to have this farm, be able to sustain yourself, pass it down to your son. He has a 14-year-old son named Henry, who likes to be called Hank, and his wife Arlette. But apparently his wife is from the city. She owns like 100 acres worth of land that she wants to sell, get money back, move back to the city. And he's all about his values. Keeping the family farm so he can pass it down to his son. And when she's not willing to budge, that's when he decides to kind of play along, that he's now on her side, get her drunk, slits her throat, has his son help him, and then the next chunk of the film is laying all the breadcrumbs to help, prove this story, and then the guilt sets in. And, if you haven't seen it yet, it's definitely worth a watch. Along with Gerald's Game, it is one of the better King films to come out in quite some time. It's definitely one that I've enjoyed the most in quite a while. And especially ones that are like first time adaptations, not like It or Pet Sematary, where it's not the first one. But he dumps the body down in the well where there's no water, and you can tell how cunning and conniving this guy is, which through voiceover he kind of says things like, he talks about the conniving man, and in the end he always gets caught. But he lays all these breadcrumbs like Well, actually, I did already say spoilers. So, spoilers, go check it out. I really do recommend it. Only things that might be a little slow paced. So, he tells people that she ran off with someone because it kind of comes to light that she's been having an affair. So, he takes a suitcase of uh, very little clothes, uh, leaves the car, tells the sheriff that, oh, she must have packed just enough to carry, didn't take the car because she didn't want to wake me up. That all seems normal. Well, I think first he tells, I think it was some attorney. First, some guy shows up. That's who he gives the story to. Then the sheriff shows up. But before the sheriff does, Will suspects that he's going to want to look around, look down in the well, so they need a reason to cover it up. So they bring one of their cows to stand over the cover. It falls through, doesn't die, he has to shoot it. Story, cow got loose, fell in the well, died, and now we got to fill up the well. So now that's there. But first, when he goes to throw the suitcase in, he sees that she's already been eaten up by rats. We do get a CGI rat come out of her mouth. CGI didn't bother me in this. I mean, it's really only used for rats and to do so rats could do certain things. That didn't bother me. And I think that's the moment when guilt starts to set in because from this point on, he sees rats everywhere. And I think the rats are sort of the main symbol of guilt. And, so he feeds the story to the sheriff. But the sheriff even finds like an old pair of boots. Saying, well, why didn't she just bring these? This would be ideal for foot travel. And he very quickly comes up with something. But now the son starts to feel more guilt. He has a relationship with this neighbor who's very successful, played by Neil McDonough. He's dating the daughter of that neighbor, who's an old friend of Wilf's. She tells Wilf that Hank's been acting weird, moody, quiet. But things get more complicated when Hank tells him that he impregnated her. They're both, 15. He wants to run off and get married to her. He says no. But then the neighbor says, well, your boy got my girl pregnant, sending her to a Catholic school. She gives birth, it's going up for adoption. Never want to see your son again. Oh, and since the baby's half your blood, you got to pay me half for her schooling, which is like $75, which he doesn't have. I mean, he's very poor, and I guess the whole thing is it's not that he really killed her for monetary gain. He really just wanted to keep his house. It's more of like a values kind of thing. So he has no money. He had already, like turned in his crops and paid off whatever debt. But he does remortgage his house for $750, but he's unable to pay it. So then, once the daughter shipped off, he finds out that his son ran away with her, which we see he, helped her escape the school. They kind of went on this Bonnie and Clyde type adventure where she's killed. And this is when winter sets in. And this is one of those few supernatural parts where the dead wife is kind of like up close to him, almost as if she's giving him a vision of what happens to Hank, which is, his girlfriend gets shot, they're driving away, car gets stuck, he takes her to this abandoned house. As he's fixing a fire, she dies, he commits suicide. But at the same time, his hand got infected. I think it was self-inflicted bites, but it gets infected. They amputate his hand. He's all messed up. So it doesn't really it's possible he could have found out about his son in some other way. Like it could have been like a big news story and he heard about it, and this was some sort of infectious fever dream. It, it can be interpreted in some non-literal way, some way, which is how I took it. So ultimately, he killed his wife so he could keep his house, and eventually pass it down to his son. But his son impregnated his girlfriend, couldn't wait for her to come back after being sent away. He went on his own thing. She got killed. He committed suicide. And even when she gets sent away, he starts to blame Wilf, and saying, if mom was still alive, she would have helped me out. You know, we killed her for a reason, but now we have nothing to show for it. And then we just start to kind of see the house fall in on itself. I also think the house kind of represents his state of mind. Not that it's falling apart, but he eventually has to let one of the cows live inside. Oh, earlier on we do get a scene where he hears cows going crazy out in the barn. When he goes out to look, he sees a rat has almost completely chewed an udder off because a pipe from the well goes into the barn. So he has to cement that up. It basically just leads to, eventually, after he's lost everything, the last thing he has to do is sell his house. Couldn't pay the mortgage, had to, hand his house over to the bank. That sold to the company his wife was going to sell it to anyway. He had to move to the city, which he never wanted to do with his wife. And he's working at some sort of factory where he sees more rats. And then that takes us up to 1930, where he's in the hotel room. He sees rats everywhere. These rats I don't think are real, the ones in the hotel room. I think that's his guilt completely taking over. And he then sees, his wife, his son's girlfriend as sort of dead. Because also, he does see his son's body when he gets shipped back. And when he sees the body, it's been all chewed up by rats as well. And that's these sort of dead zombie-looking apparitions. The son takes out a knife, saying it'll be quick. Cut to black, where it says, in the end, you always get caught. Implying that he's going to die somehow. Now, I know in the book, there's an extra bit, or an epilogue, saying that he was found with self-inflicted bites. So I'm guessing in his mind, he thought rats were biting him everywhere, but it was really just himself, and he bled out. So yeah, I think this is a great story, just about, murder for a reason, but then once those reasons don't come to fruition, or just things don't go as planned, and the guilt just keeps racking up, and not only do things go the way they would have if you hadn't committed the murder, but they went that way, and now you just had the murder on top of it anyway. And it's very well directed. It looks great. It does have this very somber, bleak tone to it that I really enjoyed. And Thomas Jane's performance is, I think, the strongest I've ever seen him in. It was hard to get used to his accent. Sometimes I couldn't understand what he was saying, both with dialect and just some of the euphemisms and slang that he was using. But overall, I thought this was a very solid film. But yeah, that's Stephen King's 1922. That's on Netflix. So if you stuck through the spoilers, still go check it out because it's worth it. I do have a few more King films to get to. Mostly just longer ones by this point. Like It Chapter 2, some of the miniseries. But stay tuned for those. And thank you for watching.